there was a Nazi serial killer who roamed the streets of World War II Berlin. His name was Paul Ogorzow, and he lived in this area, a working class district called Karlshorst. Now, Ogotov was exactly the kind of man that the authorities were not looking for. He was a family man. He used to tend to his garden. He had a good job working for the railways, where he wore a dark uniform that gave him protection, hid his identity from his victims, who he attacked during the World War II blackouts that were, of course, supposed to protect Berliners. Ogotov evaded authorities for 2 years during World War II. During this time, he murdered 8 women and assaulted many more. His story is, of course, I mean, let's be honest, a little bit juicy, certainly very interesting, but it also tells us a lot about what life was like inside of Nazi Berlin during the Second World War, and how law and justice operated as well, and more to the point, how authorities don't know exactly what they're doing and who they're looking for. Let's explore all of this in this video. In order to explain how Ogatov used the blackouts to attack his victims, I just want to talk a little bit about the blackouts themselves. Now, it's as you're expecting. During World War II, when the air raid sirens went off, the lights went out. That means no street lights. It means you could have lights on in your home, but only if you had very thick blackout curtains. There were also air raid wardens who would come around and make sure that these orders were being followed. Car headlamps would be reduced to just thin little slits at crossroads. There would be very dim lighting. On the edge of the pavement, the curbs would, in some cases, be painted bright white so that people could see them a little bit in the darkness. One thing that they did struggle to do, though, was see one another. They would see other people as just kind of little floating blobs, because lots of people wore tiny glow-in-the-dark pins. Of course, the blackouts were absolutely terrifying, but of course they also provided cover for all sorts of criminals. And so to discourage criminal activity, the penalties for committing crimes during the blackouts, robberies, assaults, and so on, I mean, those penalties were far much worse. In Nazi thinking, what might be a crime in the daytime, let's imagine stealing a handbag, would be a crime against the German people during the blackouts. And as a result, something that could land you with a month in prison if you did it at midday might get you really the death sentence, with no exaggeration, if you do it not just at night, but during the blackouts. Now, of course, this meant that the streets of Berlin were incredibly dark, but there's certain areas where there's less lighting anyway that were even darker. And those are areas like this, over here. Actually, when I have visitors join me on my tours in Berlin, they sometimes ask me about these places because they think they look like little kind of poverty-stricken shanty towns, when in fact they're actually very nice places. They are allotments, right? Little private gardens. Most Berliners live in apartments, so to have an allotment is to have a little bit of outdoor space, a little bit of freedom. And this is where Ogatov begins his first attacks. Now, as for a little bit about Ogatov himself, he was born in 1912. He grew up actually in East Prussia, although he was adopted at the age of 12 years old. And as a young adult, he would then move here to Berlin. He did join the Nazi Party and become a member of the stormtroopers in 1931. This is something that would give you a lot of cachet with the Nazis once they'd taken power. People who had joined before 1933, before they had come to power, had definitely joined because they were into it. There's, of course, many people who joined the party afterwards because they were pressured into it, they felt like they had to, or they were opportunistic. They did it because they thought that it would mean there would be less eyes on them. It would make their life a lot easier. And of course, there's many people who joined after they took power because they wanted to, because they thought they had the right idea. Don't think I'm saying nobody was into it, you know? Ogatsov did actually take part in the violence of November 8th, 9th, 1938, known as Kristallnacht, the Night of Broken Glass, when synagogues are attacked, burned, destroyed all over the country. So he's obviously a violent man. It's likely he would have had these kind of violent urges anyway, but it's in places very much like this, if not exactly here, where his first attacks start to happen in the summer of 1939. As a railway worker, actually as a signal operator who lived nearby, Ogatov knew that there were many women who would use this garden colony as a shortcut to get home from the nearby station. As a result, he thought that this dark, quiet, secluded space would be a great place to start hiding in the bushes, and in the summer of 1939, in August, start jumping out of them and blinding them with a torch during the blackout, something that he thought was funny. So he started to do it to more women, and then it escalates from here. He starts to chase them, he starts to hit them, he starts to stab them, he starts to assault them. one of his victims screamed very loud, and Ogatov didn't know that she had two male companions nearby, her husband and her brother-in-law, who then started to chase Ogatov. They did actually catch him and start hitting him. And so, yeah, he still was able to hide his identity. Again, the blackouts, the dark uniform helped this. The uniform, of course, anonymizes him somewhat as well. But this scared him. He knew that his days attacking women in this garden colony were numbered. But then, of course, he has the train knowledge. He knows that there are certain trains, certain special types of carriages that women would often take alone at night. And so he starts to move his violence to his work, to the trains. Ogatov worked on the S-Bahn, the Berlin commuter rail system that is over 150 years old. People still use it today. And this system at this time was a little bit different. There were two distinct classes, second and third class, no first class, don't know why. And this means that, okay, in second class you had somewhere that's a bit nicer, it's gonna have fewer people in it, and it means that in the dead of night during World War II, when more women than ever are in work, there's going to be women riding in second class alone. And of course, Ogatov has the perfect cover. He has his railway uniform. And so he's able to walk into the second-class carriages, and of course people aren't going to bat an eyelid to see somebody in the railway uniform there, and he's therefore able to also approach these women under the guise of asking them for their tickets. And so, yeah, they're going to be not only calm, but distracted. And it's as they start to look for their tickets that Ogatov would pull out a blunt weapon, a bit of lead cable, a bit of piping, something like this, and then hit them over the head, often knock them unconscious, continue to beat them, sometimes stab them. His first victim was a woman named Gerda Kardol, and she actually survived. She was attacked in September of 1940. The next month, in October, emboldened by the fact that not only is he not getting caught, he's not appearing in the press, more on that later, he continues attacking women around here. In fact, his first murder takes place in the allotment gardens around here on the night of the 3rd to 4th of October 1940. A couple more attacks will follow in November and December as well, and this is where, yeah, he creates something of a signature attack, knocking women over the head and then beating them, assaulting them. And then as the train is moving, he will prise open the doors, and then, without knowing if they're alive or dead, he will throw women off of the train, throw their bodies off of the train. I think you'd be right to ask, where were the police, where were the press during all of this? Of course, rumors in this area start to grow about this terrible man, these horrible attacks, that it's dangerous to walk through here at night. But why doesn't it appear in the press? Well, Joseph Goebbels, propaganda minister, he knows that this is going on, but he doesn't want to create a sense of panic. He doesn't want men out at the front to worry about their wives and daughters back home, and so he bans the press from talking about it. This, of course, limits, really rather hampers what the police can do. The police struggle, therefore, to publicize this, to get people in to come and talk to them, to find out what's really happening here as well. The police are also hampered by Nazi ideology. This is World War II. Nazi Germany has been very successful, let's say, in its aims, and as a result has started to bring a lot of foreign workers here to Berlin. Well, it must be them. It must be the so-called subhuman Slavs, and if it's not them, it must be the so-called subhuman Jews. Again, Ogatov has got cover just based on exactly who he is. He's a so-called Aryan German, a Nazi party member. It couldn't possibly be somebody like him, so they're not looking for him. And when I say they, I'm talking about the head of the homicide unit in the Kripo, or Kriminalpolizei, criminal police, which is a man at this time named Wilhelm Lüdke, and he's quite an interesting figure. The Nazis did not necessarily like him, at least in the period 1929 to 1933, when as a policeman, he had actually, let's say, had a few tussles with the Nazis, against the Nazis. The Nazis actually locked him up for this when they first came to power, but obviously they made their peace because, yeah, to be in the Kriminalpolizei during World War II, you actually had to be a member of the Nazi party, if not the SS. The head of the police in Nazi Germany was the head of the SS, was Heinrich Himmler. Of course, in Nazi Germany, you have this distinct blurring between the lines of party and state. So yes, Lüdke was a Nazi party member, but He wasn't exactly a die-hard Nazi, let's say. Hey, remember, I do not have sponsors on my videos yet. And so if you want to help create more of these videos, you have to like, comment, subscribe, and share all of them. I have reached the point on YouTube where I get paid. In April 2025, I made $250. Woo! Obviously not enough to live off whatsoever, but it is a start, and I'm very, very thankful for that, especially if you're one of those people who's watched, liked, and subscribed already. But if you haven't, do all of those things, and I can bring you more of these. All right, on with the show. With the violence escalating, with the murder escalating, Ludka was actually allowed to start something of a large yet quiet manhunt. What the police started to do is have female police officers volunteer to sit in plain clothes in those second-class carriages and wait for Ogatov to present himself. Now, of course, they would be armed, ready, and waiting, and they would have backup officers, male officers, in the third-class carriages next door. Sometimes male officers also dressed up as women and rode those trains in the hopes of finding Ogatov, and as ingenious as this idea was, it was ultimately unsuccessful, and it didn't solve the problem of a killer out on the loose. And so they came up with an idea that would protect the women of this area, of the eastern part of Berlin. They came up with a kind of protection service, a kind of buddy system of sorts. Upstanding members of society, often stormtroopers, could volunteer for this program where they would accompany women on their commute, on their way to and from home and work and so on. Ogatov actually volunteered for this program as well. The problem for Ogatov was it certainly meant that he would be alone with women, which you can only assume is what he wanted, but it also meant that there was a paper trail, that there was literal evidence of him specifically being paired up with these women, meaning that, these would not be women that he could get away with attacking. Although there was one woman who actually asked him to accompany him, even though she hadn't signed up to the program, and he certainly did attack her. Now, during the months that this program was in operation, about 5 months or so, there were little to no attacks at all. This was, of course, good on the one hand, but bad on the other for the police because, they couldn't catch him, they couldn't apprehend him. It meant that he was still somehow at large. On the night of the 3rd of July, 1941, a 35-year-old woman named Frieda Kotzio exited an S-Bahn train at Rummelsburg station in the middle of the night in pitch darkness. As she left the station, Ogatov grabbed and attacked her and eventually took her life. This would be Ogatov's final murder. He left a key piece of evidence at the scene that I guess he never even could have thought of because it was a muddy footprint. It turns out Ogatov had a very specific, very rare kind of work boot, and this is what enabled the police to eventually find him. They were able to track down the sales of this boot. They initially apprehended the wrong person, but through a mix of interviews with rail employees and this footprint evidence, they were able to find him. Now, it turned out that some of Ogatov's colleagues knew that he was a little bit weird, a little bit strange, and that also he would abandon his duties during the middle of the night, leave his signal post and go off for walks for long hours. When the police eventually apprehended Ogatov, they also found in his possession a couple of sets, I believe, of bloody rail worker uniforms. It obviously couldn't be anybody else. It was on the 12th of July, 1941 that Ogatov was arrested. One newspaper went with the headline that the S-Bahn murderer has been caught. Of course, the police, they were pretty sure that they had their man, but they needed to prove it. And so the final step, really, was interrogating Ogatov, which Wilhelm Lüdke did himself in a highly unconventional way. He sat opposite Ogatov at an interrogation desk and presented him with a tray filled with human skulls that had suffered blunt force trauma to the head. They were, of course, Ogatov's victims. This was to shock, to scare him. He also brought in a survivor of Ogatov's attacks and made her stand there as he came up behind her, as Ogatov came up behind her, and then she confirmed after this creepy feeling that that was definitely him. Ogatov also fell for something of a good cop routine. Lüdke said, we're both party members, I can help you out and so on. And these three things combined convinced Ogatov to spill the beans. He did try to lie. He said he was an alcoholic, he didn't know what he was doing, and that there was this Jewish doctor that had given him this weird prescription for his syphilis, and that it was actually all the fault of this Jew. But in the midst of explaining all of this, he also gave all the details of the 8 murders and various assaults that he had committed. The police were 100% sure that they had the right guy, and so a special court was arranged for Ogatov on the 24th of July, 41, where they sentenced him to death. The Nazi Party had already kicked him out, and inside of the court they said that he had forfeited his right to live in German society. On the 26th of July, he was taken to the Plötzensee prison, also in Berlin, where he was executed. Now, the method of execution that the Nazis would use for criminals was not the gas chamber, that's what they used for mass murder in Eastern Europe. For individual criminals like this, they actually preferred to use the guillotine, which I know sounds very outdated, medieval, even though it's from the end of the 18th century, I know. The thing about the guillotine is that it works. It is very, very definite. It is, in a sense, humane. And so 26th of July 1941, Ogatov was beheaded, and the S-Bahn murderer, the Nazi serial killer in World War II Berlin, was no more. A little addendum to this, by the way, Wilhelm Lüdke, SS man, was he a good guy, bad guy? I don't know. Don't want to say that anybody who deigned to wear an SS uniform could be a good guy. He was actually wearing that SS uniform during the Battle of Berlin. Now, when the Red Army came in at the end of the war, if anyone was wearing an SS uniform, it was quite a short trial and sentencing process for them. Du SS, bang. But somehow Lüdke manages to survive, and then he will start to work with the Americans as a spy in the 1950s. He's something of an industrial spy. He's supposed to spy on whatever industrial activity is taking place in Poland. Seems to have had quite a short career, and he died, off the top of my head, of a heart attack in 1957. That is the story of the S-Bahn murder. Again, this creep who would attack women in an area like this. I hope you found it very interesting. Of course, this video is sponsored. It's sponsored by me, Whitlam's Berlin Tours. You know I'm a tour guide. So yeah, make sure that you follow me, follow the podcast. This was actually a podcast episode once. Look at me reusing content. And yeah, whatever video's on the screen, go click that and make sure you subscribe as well. Ciao.